Olá, bem-vindos e bem-vindas ao Olhar de Cinema, nessa edição online de 2020. A gente agora vai poder conversar com o diretor de um dos filmes da competição de longas desse ano. São 9 longas que estão participando do Olhar. E a gente tem aqui o prazer e a honra de poder conversar com Arun Karthick, que é um diretor que chega para a gente diretamente da Índia, nesse momento, para a nossa conversa, e que o filme dele teve a sua estreia mundial no começo de 2020, no Festival de Roterdã, na Holanda, na competição principal do festival, e a partir daí tem feito uma trajetória muito interessante a partir desse evento inicial. Então a gente vai conversar com o Arun em inglês, e vocês vão estar aqui com as legendas aqui embaixo, e a partir de agora, então, a gente vai para essa parte do inglês. E para isso, eu vou passar a palavra para uma primeira pergunta para o meu colega Arun Cutler. Eu sou Eduardo Valente, nós dois somos membros da equipe de programação do Festival Olhar de Cinema. Arun.
Thank you, Eduardo, and thank you, Arun, for your presence and for this wonderful film, Nasir. Obviously, the main character of the film is very important. We can see that by the fact that the film is named after him. So my first question is, how were you inspired to make a film about this character? How did you go constructing this character in all senses? And how did you go as well constructing the world around him to make him make sense within it and to have him reveal something about it?
Hello, everyone. So the desire to make this film came after reading a short story in Tamil. So this film is an adaptation of a short story from a writer called Dilip Kumar, who is also from my same region, from my same district in my state. So I read the short story around 2013-14, and immediately then the character had made an impression on me. The way the character was narrated, about the qualities of the character, and also about what the film speaks about, and the way it speaks about certain political aspects of the country, by not directly talking about it, but at the same time imbibing the life around a person and somehow trying to bring it in and put it in context. So I was irked by the story to begin with, but then I carried on doing other stuff, and it was in the year 2016, after I had made my first feature, that there was this certain riot near my home. And after making my first independent feature, I was figuring out what to do, and then I fancied being an entrepreneur by starting a small kiosk which sells coffees and all that. And that was kind of destroyed in a riot that happened, in a communal riot. And this brought me back to the short story, and then I started looking into the short story as in how it reflects some of the things that happened around the country and in my state a few years ago, and also in present times. And it was like a sign to me, this having witnessed this communal outbreak in my neighborhood, then I took it as a sign, and I thought that I should be expressing this. And I was getting obsessed by this story about this person who seemingly wants peace and wants to have his wants to have a relaxed life, but then somehow he's pulled into things that he is in no way connected with. So once I made the decision to adapt the story, I took up a small house in the ghetto, which is in my city. The ghetto is in the middle of the city. It's in the heart of the city. And I started living there and writing the story and looking at people and looking at some of their characters and looking at the bazaar streets. And I slowly started incorporating those details. And the short story itself had a lot of details about the character, about his family, about the neighborhood. But then me being there for a couple of years helped me kind of understand the nuances of the space, and also of all the other details regarding the character. And that is how I developed it, right from being in that space. And fortunately, we also got the Hubert Ball's grant, which allowed us to develop it further. And we had additional producers. We took the film and pitched it in different forums, and we kind of got the financing going in one way. And somehow we kind of put it all together.
Arun, something that you mentioned there that I had read about in interviews with you about this process of living a life in a way similar to at least the atmosphere that the character lives. and getting to know this firsthand. And I think how much also that helped with the actual shooting. If you could talk a little bit about that, because it's a film that is very embedded, so to speak, in the community where it takes place. So I imagine that to take the actual, even if it's a small crew, but just the actual the whole way that films are shot, and putting that in that place, how important it was that you were there for a while before. How did that help with the shooting process of the film?
So I think, Eduardo, that by virtue of being a filmmaker, already you at many times feel like an outsider. Even though the story is about another person or it's about yourself, you have to deal with a crew and other actors who want to kind of fit into the roles, and so this feeling of outsider, how can you actually, so from this point of an outsider, how do you empathize? So this empathy happens probably through understanding your character's neighborhood or your character's world. Once you understand that world, then you are at a better position to make choices about how you want that world to be felt or to be portrayed. So to actually understand how to create this inner world of Nasir, of this character, beyond the peripheral, beyond the physical, there has to be moods, moments, or feelings that has to come from a certain lived in experience. I believe in that. Even for my next film, I'm already in the place where the narrative is going to play out, and I've taken up a space, and I'm starting to work from here. And for me personally, it adds a lot. Rather than sitting in one place and thinking about another space and writing, and all that, just being in that space and on an everyday basis, observing people who belong to that space, looking at walls, textures, and spaces, it helps me formulate in my mind as to how I want this film to be, in a sense that the things that I want to communicate, so these are the things that I want to communicate, and I need to know that through color, through sound, through image, through dialogues, through like the way some people talk, all of these are, especially in a country like India where there are so many cultures and so many traditions, you need to kind of find uh, the right rhythm and also the right mode of expression, using all of these uh, techniques, so I thought being in that space actually for me as a workflow helps to be inspired on an everyday basis to work, because we shot for just 20 days, but I spent around 2 to 2.5 years in that space. And even though I am from the same city, I was living 20 kilometers apart. I still felt like I would be like more of a tourist if I visit my location every day. Rather, why don't I just take up a space? That space should very closely resemble the house that Nasir himself is living in, so that I can pick up some details, from. I mean, I would not disillusion myself thinking that I would become the character. No, that is not the intention. I can never become the character, but I can at least try to understand how such a person would probably, would have, live, or how a day unfolds in such a scenario. So this kind of workflow kind of helps me and also keeps me inspired and keeps me in my own way to just keep adding things. And then later I bring my crew and I bring my collaborators, and they also like to look at the space and listen to my ideas, and they would like to interpret that space with their own understanding of the narrative and what we want to do henceforth. So it's an interesting mix of working in the actual real location, and secondly, the kind of cinema we are making, I don't think we can afford to like build sets or studios and shoot the film there. The film has to have that lively, candid feeling. At the same time, it has a very structured mise en scène. We can't just pick up the camera and shoot wherever we want. We have very carefully mapped out spaces and moments which needs to be evoked in another. Let's, for example, the houses that I want for the film are houses that another people are living, so I need to on a physical basis get to know them and get permissions from them to shoot in their streets, to shoot in their houses, to shoot in shops, where on an everyday basis uh, business is going on. So it's a mix of interpreting that reality through our experience and also through our what do you call it, it's also a documentary aspect of actually applying yourself in the space and waiting for certain details to come out. And then once you know that these are the details I want, then you try to look at it from your narrative point of view and try to include it into your world. So I believe this kind of enriches us, and which kind of moves the narrative from a definite space to a little bit of an indefinite space.
And in between as well, from a space of action to a space of contemplation, the film exists
Exactly.
in these,
Because
two modes.
sometimes when you have um, uh, when you have locations which are exactly made for the film, you tend to be very fixed with what you've just written, and all the other details or coincidences that perhaps would help the story would have been ruled out, So, and also maybe I'm not excited in that kind of a working scenario. I'm more excited to work in scenarios where at every moment there is always something that is constantly questioning your choice, and you're thinking about it, and you're trying to collaborate with the space itself and with the people who are there. So in most scenarios, in most of the scenes, people did not even know we were making a film, but we were there like a guerrilla crew with a small crew. We were there in different spaces. We'd set up our camera. We knew what kind of shots we wanted, and that happened also because of the time we spent taking pictures of that location on an everyday basis, going and seeing that location in different kind of lighting, and also and talking to the people there, and trying to understand what kind of faces I want for the film, or what kind of characters do you actually want to play in the film. So these realizations for me happens after I have a kind of a first-hand experience of the space and living in that space, rather than just visiting it from time to time.
I want to just back up a minute just to throw forward a few notes of context, a few darts of context. That was a great answer, by the way. For anyone who's interested, the story that Nasir is based on, a clerk story by Dilip Kumar, is available online in English, can be found with a Google search. Your first feature is called The Strange Case of Shiva, in English, if that's correct, and Nasir is your second fiction feature. And the city where you are from and where the film takes place is a city called Coimbatore, which is in the state of Tamil Nadu. And something that's interesting, there are two Indian films in the festival this year, in Olhar Cinema's program this year. One of them is a film called Shtal Puran, or Chronicle of Space, from Maharashtra. And Nasir is a film from Tamil Nadu. So it's an entirely different state with an entirely different language. And it shows a very different way of life. And so it's very interesting to have these two films. And in the case of Nasir's life in particular, I mentioned action and contemplation because he's a very interesting character in that he embodies both. He's an ordinary person in the sense that he's a working man, in the sense that he has a job that he goes to and spends his day at, but he's also an extraordinary person in the sense that he has a very rich and brilliant inner life that the film captures. And furthermore, he is a member of a minority class, a Muslim class within a predominantly Hindu area, who the film pays special attention to in this regard, in having this rich and brilliant inner life. So why was it important to you to show this contemplative side of Nasir within this larger context? How did you do it? And why was it so important to you to have that exist in some kind of contrast with the world around him?
The contemplative aspect comes out through, I want to bring kind of a dignity to such lives, dignity as in, of course, they are dignified characters in themselves, but when you portray such characters, especially like lower middle class characters, what drew me to the short story was that Nasir, even though there are problems in his everyday, he doesn't complain about them. He tries to make the most out of whatever little things he has. He's nice to people, and he doesn't do things just to be nice or anything. So there is an ordinariness about him. In an ordinary way, he seems content with everything. And this ordinariness itself is sometimes extraordinary, because people always regret or always want more of what they already have in life. So in that way, I thought constructing this ordinariness is very important, because once you construct this ordinariness, then actually it can feel extraordinary, because he is extraordinary, but that getting from the ordinary to the extraordinary happened from the short story through the details that the writer had put in the short story, and also in the way we wanted to give space for that character. For instance, in the short story, the writer had written that Nasir smokes 10 BDs a day. BD is the local smoke, this thing. So there are places in the film where we let him have his smoke, or we let him have take his nap, like eat his food, and these are moments in a day which are not extraordinary, which are ordinary. And there are a lot of his actions in the film which definitely are not extraordinary, are ordinary, but the way that the time develops, and the way that the audience participates in his time, and that brings a kind of a dignity to the character, I believe. And Dilip Kumar, the writer, had really succeeded in actually making us participate in his life, empathize with life, so that we could understand, okay, here is a person with whom I can relate in different ways, even though there might have be some problems in his life, even though there might be some disappointments, he is not hanging on to those things. He's more of a happy-go-lucky guy who wants to look ahead and wants to look for tomorrow, and he has plans, for his cousin, for his wife, and everybody, and so all of these ordinary things should be also captured, let's say, with that ordinary feeling, not try to treat him as a hero per se, which most of the films from our place try to put the protagonist in the space of a hero, and he has this special qualities, that special qualities, and all of that. So I thought, by virtue of him being a minority, uh, he he faces, of course, a lot of let's say a lot of enmity, or he on an everyday basis actually has to deal with the majority of the, I mean, the Hindus and other religion who live side by side. So it is also important to show that for me, that this person lives in a neighborhood where there are so many other communities, predominantly Hindu, and probably faces discrimination every other day. eh, and and since he faces discrimination every other day, the discrimination itself is normalized, and which is also scary, because it is also a way of kind of like, you see the whole treatment of sound in the way they walk through the streets and all of that. I clearly wanted to communicate the contrast of how the Hindu community nearby is kind of instigating us or propagating a certain kind of violence through their loudspeakers, and so, I mean, of course, the minority can react anytime, and sometimes they do. But this coexisting factor sometimes is also the boon and the bane. It is good at sometimes when it takes communal turns. It is horrific. So the contrast has to be clearly demarcated. There is a demarcation in life in these parts. At the same time, there are characters who can try to transcend this demarcation of religion and community, and try to indulge themselves more into their inner world, into their immediate family and everything. So I thought it was important to kind of define these things within the world of Nasir.
I'm thinking you mentioned in your response there something that was important about Nasir, which is that he's not strictly stuck to the present, because as a character he's constantly thinking about aspects of his future. And I think that's something that strikes us when we see these kind of films, a film like that, which has that relationship with his character at this point in time, is that in the future of the character or of the world, there was the pandemics coming up, and we didn't know about it, of course, when we thought about these films, when we made those films, but that was there in the future. And now it becomes something that all the spectators in the end are watching the films now within that present, which was the future of the characters, even if we didn't know about it. And I'm wondering, if you can give us a feeling of, or a small entry into how this has been lived by you, special individually, of course, because it's always an individual experience, but also by India, which, as Arun said, and as we know, has many different realities. Of course, we in Brazil, in general, are very ignorant about the very different realities that there are within a country such as India. but particularly if you can talk to us about the more general aspect of it,
Yes.
particularly in what has to do, of course, with some social and political instances, but I don't want you to be making like social
Yes.
political analysis, but talking from your point of view, how do you feel that in a way also affects directly your future projects or the project you're dealing with right now, and all of that? How does that pandemics come in and change and operate all of that within you as a creator at this point?
Yes. And Arun, may I ask a quick practical question related to that, or is that too much information for you already?
No, you can, Arun.
Okay, so within this matter of how the pandemic has affected India, I'm curious just on a very practical level, if Hindu and Muslim populations have been affected differently by the pandemic within that.
I mean, that's a very important thing to note that during the early part of the pandemic, the Muslim minorities was constantly targeted of having been less careful and for having uh, propagated the virus, elsewhere. Because, of course, generally the virus does not know religion and anybody could give it to anyone. But the moment when the source is being identified as Muslim, or the source is as identified to a Muslim group, they have been heavily uh, the public image of the Muslims, the way the government deals with it, or the way that the majority Hindu fanatics deal with it, have been really horrible. And Muslims, even if there have been numerous instances where the source group has been traced for being a Muslim, and in the beginning part, there was even a large widespread rumor around the country that that the coronavirus in India came because of the Muslims and so on. But it's just rubbish, because I mean, anybody who was careless, any human who sometimes careless or who sometimes had nothing to do, was in the wrong space at the wrong time, could have carried it. So that apart, the situation in India is worrying. As you might be aware, that India is currently number 2 or something in the total number of cases behind America, and the number of cases is picking up in every major city and smaller towns. And India is still a country of a lot of small towns and villages. And in our space, particularly in Tamil Nadu, the capital city and some major cities had a lot of cases. I am from the second most largest city, but I don't live in the city. I live away from the city, near the mountains. That is where my native village is from. So here there weren't much of cases. So I was generally trying to stay home, and in the evenings I'd go back to the village, connect with my friends, play cricket, and try to. This was a time for me to connect back with a lot of my friends, because everybody who were working in all the big cities had come back home. So I was getting back to my village, reconnecting with all my friends, and trying to write my next film based on some events that happened in my village. So I have been, let's say, relatively safe, and my part of the country is a little better off compared to the more densely populated pockets. But the virus is catching up, and right now, for the last few weeks, I have completely shifted to the forest. I've taken up a farmhouse where I'm writing my next film. So I try to put myself a little more away from humanity and stay with some trees, and keep things to a minimum, and focus more on writing, thinking, and yeah. But what can you do? I mean, there are some people who do not have the luxury to change their homes or change their space or move to a different space. And this coronavirus has actually exposed the prevailing gap between the rich and the poor. The people have found out that they don't even own a piece of land or piece of shelter, to take refuge. They were always in the city. Immigrants who were sleeping on the streets or sleeping in some other spaces, they can't do that anymore because of the lockdown and everything, and everybody are forced to go back to their villages. And once they go back to their villages, they realize that they don't have anything. They so this kind of has exposed a lot of the problems in the system, both administratively and financially. But I think that is for the good, meaning the exposure of the corruption, of the problems of the system is good. But I mean, most of us are not happy with the way the government is handling it, and so many other things. So I hope the situation changes, and I hope. I mean, that is the only thing we have, hoping that tomorrow would be a better day. And then, like our other friend Eduardo told, that the sense of tomorrow is very important to human desire. That what would happen tomorrow? The fact that I would wake up to a better day, the fact that I have something to do tomorrow afternoon or evening, is a good feeling. And the sense of regret also comes from a lot of the things that we did in the past. So once you take that out, I think, yeah.
Excellent. I think that as an artist, you work to make us more aware of our shared humanity. I find this project very inspiring, and I think that Nasir is a very inspiring film in this regard. I have no more questions except to ask if you would like to say anything else. Eduardo, do you have any other questions?
No, I just double down on what Arun just said about the film, and also maybe something that might be interesting to pass on to you is that I think that in many ways, not only the film, but also some of the things you were talking about right now may make us realize very easily that Brazil shares a lot of common aspects of life with India, even if many of the cultural, historical, human characteristics are very local and very, very different. But on the other hand, a lot of what you're talking about, particularly not only in the social fabric, but also including the question of the different groups in terms of religion, which for a long time appeared to be a problem which Brazil in general dealt with in a more integrated way, so to speak. But nowadays, that's becoming more and more also part of the everyday tension in the country. So I think we can relate with the film and with a lot of what you're talking as something that is also very close to us in a way, even if it's so different in terms of the reality of the landscape and the people and their customs. So I think it's a film that moves us from a place which is very close, even if it's so far in terms of geography. So thank you, and I thought it would be interesting to share that with you, because I'm also very curious how some of our audience will react to the film, because I think they will recognize a lot of that unexpected, maybe, closeness between our countries.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that too, because like India, Brazil is also a multicultural society, and I'm looking at how the responses would be. I'd be glad to know. And also I wanted to share with you guys that there is a possibility that the film might be theatrically released in Brazil. We've been talking to a Brazilian distributor, one of our friends, Ivan Melo. He wants to release the film. So hopefully, if things work well, there might be more chances for audience to watch the film. But for now, I would love for the audience to discover the film in Olhar and kind of feel what the country has been going through recently.
Thank you so much, Arun.
Thank you,
We
Eduardo.
hope that happens. Yes.
Yes,
we'll do
Arun.
our best. We'll do our best to have a good day, and we hope that you have a great night. Thank you for our talk.
Thank you.
And good luck for your work.
Thank you, Eduardo. Yeah.